Coray was born in Canada, and her family migrated down to Illinois, and they converted to the Mormon religion. When Joseph Smith was killed at the Carthage jail on June 27th of 1844, Melissa and her family moved into Nauvoo, which was the home city of the LDS Church at that time. There she met a young man by the name of William Coray, and they fell in love in the midst of all this turmoil. William and Melissa were part of that first migration out of Illinois, headed towards what we now call Omaha. They called it winter quarters, to spend the winter. When they arrived in that area, Melissa and William were married. She was 18, he was 23. William enlists into the Mormon Battalion. Well, Melissa is not about to let her sweetheart go off to war without her, so she enlists as one of the laundresses. So William and Melissa proceed to have their honeymoon walk to San Diego. They got their accoutrements, and then they proceeded with the U.S. Army down the Santa Fe Trail. They're going to take Santa Fe from the Mexicans. And as they rode into Santa Fe ready to do battle, there was no battle to be had. The Mexican army had retreated to Chihuahua. When it was time to leave Santa Fe and head for California, the job of the Mormon Battalion for the military was to build a military wagon road from Santa Fe into Southern California. And it was a very difficult journey. When the battalion finally reached San Diego on the last week of January of 1847, the war in California with the Mexicans was over. Melissa was 1 month pregnant. The Mormon Battalion stayed on to finish up their one-year enlistment, and in July they were discharged and said, "Thank you for your service, and you can now go home." So here they are in California with very little money, and where are they going? Went up the El Camino Real to go to the Mormon settlement in San Francisco. When they arrived in Monterey, which would have been September, October of 1847, Melissa gave birth to a baby boy that they named William, after the daddy. And of course they were overjoyed with the birth of this baby boy. Within a few weeks, the baby dies. William had purchased a team and a wagon. So when they arrived in San Francisco, he was able to make a living as a freighter. But he was getting sick. He was developing a cough. They now started thinking about it's time to go to the Salt Lake Valley. They don't want to go over the Truckee River route. They saw the Donner disaster in the spring of 1847. They knew how difficult it was. They knew there were 27 river crossings or more in that Truckee River Canyon. And it was difficult with pack animals, and they planned to take wagons. So they're going to find a new route over the Sierra. So in the spring of 1848, 45 men, 1 woman, 17 wagons, 2 brass cannons that they purchased from John Sutter, and 300 animals assembled in a little valley east of Placerville that they named a Pleasant Little Valley. Melissa was that 1 woman. Now the snows are melting and it's time to go. So these 45 men, 1 woman, 17 wagons, 2 brass cannons, and 300 animals head up the Indian trails. Camped in a little valley that had all these wild leeks growing there, and they said that we'll call this Leek Spring. and there was a nice spring there. They were worried because their 3 scouts hadn't come back. So they spent 2 nights at Leak Springs and worked the trail on up for another 4, 5, 6 miles and came to a second spring. And noticed there was some ground disturbance. And James Sly said, "That's a grave. That's where our brethren are buried." So they went back to Leak Spring and spent the night, and then the whole group moved up to that second spring and dug in, and sure enough, there were the bodies of their 3 comrades, bodies riddled with arrows, heads caved in, all their possessions gone, except a gold pouch that had been broken and cast off to the side. They reburied the men, and they inscribed on a tree, "In memory of our brethren who are supposed to have been murdered by Indians on June 27, 1848, Ezra Allen, Daniel Browett, and Henderson Cox. And we shall name this place Tragedy Spring." And the next day they continued on their journey, following the Indian trails, and went over the highest summit that wagons would ever travel at 9,600 feet. And so Melissa was there at the naming of Pleasant Valley, Sly Park, Leak Springs, and she probably participated in the commemoration of the 3 men that were killed at Tragedy Spring. And Melissa would be the first white woman to cross that summit of 9,600 feet, which is just below the peak that ultimately would carry her name. They finally arrived in the Salt Lake Valley in October of 1848. Melissa was pregnant, and her sweetheart was getting sicker by the day. They met her family there, and they helped build a cabin for Melissa and the pending child. And in February, Melissa gave birth to a baby girl they named Melissa. 2 weeks later, Daddy dies. So here is this 20-year-old girl who has buried a baby, buried a husband, has a baby, barely started her life, and she's experienced all of these things, including walking 3,000 to 4,000 miles to get to the Salt Lake Valley. Melissa would remarry about 1.5 years later, and she married a man named Kimball, and she would be the second of 4 wives of William Kimball. They would move 30 miles east of Salt Lake Valley and established a hotel and a gourmet restaurant right on the trail, and Melissa would be in charge of the operation of that. And they ran that for long enough so she could have a total of 9 children. But William Kimball was an alcoholic and a wife abuser, and so women left him. And Melissa went back into the Salt Lake Valley and lived in a home. She never remarried. And in her elderly years, she would be highly honored as a member of the Mormon Battalion. And in one parade, she was the Grand Marshal. And the grandkids wanted to know what Grandma was doing in the parade because she never made a big deal out of this. But everybody else knew. She did make a trip back to California to visit some of the sites. She went to the cemetery at Monterey and could never find the grave of baby William. She died about 1903 at the age of 75 in a very peaceful death. This group of 45 men, 1 woman, 17 wagons, 2 brass cannons, and 300 animals, only purpose was get to the Salt Lake Valley. They had no idea that this would become the Gold Rush Trail. And word had gotten out this was a better way and a shorter way to go than the Truckee River route. More people would use the Carson River route during the Gold Rush migration than any other trail crossing the Sierra. And it was opened by this group of Mormons who were destined to settle in the Salt Lake Valley. In 1994, the Sons of the Utah Pioneers and the group I belong to, the Oregon-California Trails Association, got together and lobbied and had the peak right above that high pass named in honor of this wonderful pioneer woman, Melissa Coray. So it's now called the Melissa